This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I love VHS. I collect all forms of dead media, but VHS is my main jam. And obviously, I love miniatures. So it's fun to bring those two things together once in a while. The concept of putting a little diorama into an actual VHS tape is very cool to me, but it's a project that comes with many limitations. First of all, the movie itself. It has to be a title that was mass-produced so that the tape isn't rare, and it's something that isn't bothersome to use for this. It also has to be something with a theme or iconic character that can be expressed in a very small space. There really isn't much room to do much within the tape cart while maintaining the original outer cart size. Once I find an appropriate title, I can jump in. On this one, I decided to keep the diorama to just one side. So I was able to keep one spool with the magnetic tape intact and just remove the empty one to make space. Now, since space is so limited and precise, I made a template for what would actually become the viewable area. I transferred this to a wood round, which was just about the same size as the spools. A little smaller, but perfect to set inside and use as a backer. I then figured out how much depth I had to work with and cut some strips of medium weight chipboard and construction paper and made walls to encase the scene. These would also block out the sight lines past it into the cart. I found two great models to use for this on myminifactory.com. One was for a quote-unquote robot officer, and the other was quote-unquote Clarence Rodiger, which is obviously modeled after the main adversary in ROBOCOP, Clarence J. Boddicker. I was gonna have them set up in a face-off situation, but it felt a little awkward, and unless I got them so tight together that it looked weird, the Clarence model would be obstructed by the frosted part of the cart window. So I said screw it and just went for the lone ROBOCOP model. I made another template fit to the inside of the frame so that I could make pieces for the backdrop to perfectly fit. I used some XPS foam to make a sort of curb. This would raise up the model so it was more centered in the window and give some depth to a scene that would be very limited depth-wise. I had to cram as much as I could into a very small space and somehow make the whole thing feel three-dimensional despite it only being 20 millimeters deep. I used a texture rolling pin from shiftinglands.com to make a great miniature brick pattern on a block of XPS foam that I could then rip into a thin slice and use as a backdrop. A thin slice of foam was cut and placed to hide the little gap between the brick and the base piece and give just a tiny bit more dimension. Even though the scene was small, I still wanted to have a lot of variety in the backdrop. So I cut another thin rectangle of foam that I textured up to look like a heavy steel cargo door that you might see in the back of a building in a loading dock. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I've recently switched my main website, blackmagicraft.ca, over to Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform that allows anyone with no web design skills to create and host fantastic websites for whatever you need. Their system has tons of customizable templates to start with, and you can get really creative with your design using their simple drag and drop system for adding and placing various assets on your page. While designing your site for desktop browsers, Squarespace will automatically create a mobile-friendly version for you. You can easily set up an online store, which is what I did to share my free printable terrain from last video with you guys. You can actually use Squarespace to host and distribute your digital products. Go check out Squarespace using the link in my description and start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch your amazing new website, use the URL squarespace.com/blackmagicraft to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code BlackMagicCraft. At this point, I couldn't do much more with the backdrop, so I searched for some small bits that I could use to fill up the scene and give it a bit more life. Found some great steel drums from Gamer's Grass and a little concrete jersey barrier that I had printed out at some point in the past when making some cyberpunk terrain. I wanted it placed at an angle, which meant I'd have to shorten it with a mitered cut. This was easily done with a rotary tool and a cutting disc. Pro tip, if you're going to be cutting resin, you don't want to mess around breathing it in, so wear a respirator. But also, clamp a shop vac to your table and do your cutting right in front of the intake. It'll suck up the vast majority of dust created before it even gets into the air. I glued the couple bits in place and put my ROBOCOP model in the scene to see how it would look through the cart window. I actually didn't like where the character was positioned, so I moved one of the barrels before the glue had set. This put our little robo buddy more center in the frame. I wanted to paint the figure and the backdrop separately, so I got them each placed on an appropriate painting handle before heading to the spray booth for some quick airbrush work. Everything was primed black with flat polyurethane primer before moving on to some rough blocking out of colors. The airbrush coloring was quite rudimentary and needed to be touched up with some acrylic paint and a brush. I remembered that the pan pastels that I recently bought and tested had some excellent colors for red bricks, as well as general dust. This was the first time I used pan pastels in a more detailed fashion, painting out individual bricks avoiding grout lines, and blending the orange and red colors together. I was pleased with how this worked out. They really are an amazing painting tool. And like I said, they work great for general dust as well, so instead of doing washes to make this scene look a little dirty, I used some brown and gray pastels to just grime things up. I especially like how it knocked down the paint on the barrels and made them look weathered. For some authentic rust, I use some of that deep down dirty rust effect that is absurdly good at making gritty, realistic looking rust textures and colors. Then I moved on to finishing up the ROBOCOP model by blackening out the appropriate parts by using some black contrast paint. There really wasn't much painting to be done on him other than the black and a tiny bit of flesh under his cowl. I did use a black oil wash to get in all the nooks and crannies and to help make the patterns on his armor pop a bit more, but that was it. Before placing him in the scene, I blacked out the edges of the frame with some flat black craft paint. After he was in place, it was just a matter of attaching the disc to the inside of the cart and closing it back up. I think this turned out so cool and will be a welcome addition to my VHS collection and movie room. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button, let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you aren't already. If you want to grab some hobby supplies and support the channel in the process, head over to blackmagiccraft.ca to get your essential equipment. Making your purchases through the Amazon affiliate links there earns the channel a commission that helps fund the production of these videos. And last, if you really like what I do, the best way you can support the channel is by signing up to the Patreon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next video. Hey, remember that time ROBOCOP shot that guy in the dick?